You speak to Labour MPs and you're left with the impression of, crikey, Keir has not got long left in him. However, you need someone to wield the knife.
It's remarkable now when you go out and about how toxic it's become around Starmer. The kind of visceral dislike of him, inevitably damaging set of local elections in May, will probably finish him off.
I mean, there is a world in which Keir Starmer serves out the year as Prime Minister because it's so difficult to get rid of a sitting Labour leader.
After the Burnham thing, who's most likely to be the heir to Keir and who's most likely to beat Nigel Farage? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. It was the political psychodrama that finished off the Tories, and now Labour look like they're heading down the exact same path. Can changing a party leader ever lead to electoral success? Quite a lot of Labour MPs seem to think so, though Andy Burnham won't, for the moment, be the man to do it for them. Keir Starmer has seen off his attempt, but hasn't given the Prime Minister any more than a temporary reprieve from dagger-wielding colleagues. Can travelling the globe as international statesman avoid the blows? China and a meeting with President Xi is his latest destination. He says that his relentless focus is actually the cost of living crisis at home. But are the public or his MPs buying it? Joining me to discuss it are senior political correspondent Paul McNamara, the iPaper's chief political commentator Kitty Donaldson, and political editor of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorp. Welcome to all of you. Let me start with you, Paul. Does the Labour Party have a Starmer problem, or is it something bigger?
I mean, he's one of their problems at the moment. I think they would have an issue of events, dear boy, events. I think the economy's not on their side at the moment. There's a small boat crisis that they would argue is going to be a massive factor come the election. The biggest problem isn't within the party, it's Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. And how you tackle that is shaping all arguments that are coming before.
Okay, and we'll talk about Farage and whether we've reached peak populism at the end of the podcast. But Kitty, let me ask you the same question. Does the Labour Party have a Starmer problem, or is it something bigger?
They certainly do have a Starmer problem. He polls worse than the Labour Party as a whole, and they'll be looking to replace him at some point. When that time comes, we're not entirely sure. We think probably not till after May. But that's what this has all been about, this weekend's shenanigans. It's been about what happens after May and getting the soft left's preferred candidate into Parliament. And at the moment, well, until recently, that was Andy Burnham. That was why they're having such a kind of breakdown about him being blocked. And what's been going on today is chatter amongst Labour MPs about, if not Andy, then whom? And I'm hearing that people are now trying to convince Ed Miliband perhaps to make a further tilt at the leadership.
Liam, it's happened quite a few times in recent weeks that people close to the Labour Party or in the Labour Party, they drag me into a quiet corner and they whisper into my ear, upon the promise of never to repeat that to anyone else, I think Keir Starmer will fight the next election and win, right? So they're actually, and almost saying it as if they belong to some kind of underground movement. Can you see him fighting the next election for Labour, let alone winning, but just being the candidate?
I thought you were going to say, Matt, that they drag you into a corner and ask you to stand as the leader. Let's face it.
I'm waiting.
At this point,
Liam.
I think you'll be polling considerably better than Keir Starmer. I can't see it. I really can't see it. I have the advantage up in the northwest of speaking to people in areas where Labour have historically always been successful, but it's remarkable now when you go out and about speaking to people how toxic it's become around Starmer. Now, from my personal perspective, I think there's been plenty of disappointment, but the kind of visceral dislike of him I find quite remarkable, and I think you can look at social media and elements of that, and some of it is maybe a little bit unfair, but I really do think we're kind of past the point of no return now, and as Kitty says, a inevitably damaging set of local elections in May will probably finish him off. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about Andy Burnham, but I think that there is a big difference there. And when I speak to people out and about, I went there yesterday into Andy Burnham's birthplace in Aintree in Merseyside. People absolutely love him. They really do. Yeah. He seems to tick some of the same boxes, remarkably, as Nigel Farage does, even though they are sort of polar opposites in terms of politics. But it's for many people, it's in terms of relatability, who they think is on their side, and I don't think they feel that from Keir Starmer.
Just for the purposes of the fact that you're our king of the north for this podcast, Liam. You're our very own king of the north. How does the visceral dislike or hatred against Starmer compare to the visceral dislike or hatred against Corbyn when he ran? Just briefly.
Well, very different. So in Liverpool, where I am now, Jeremy Corbyn was actually pretty popular. He would have big rallies here, but then you would go to areas sort of on the outskirts, more kind of red wall areas, and it was very much the opposite. I'm afraid to say for Keir Starmer, across the board where I speak to people now, it is a very, very strong and as I say, almost emotional dislike of him and what he stands for. And that, I'm afraid, is going to do for him, I think.
Okay, Liam, I've got a question for you. When you're talking to people, is that annoyance and anger squarely on Keir Starmer, or is there for the wider Labour Party in general? Have they had enough the last 18 months, all the U-turns, or is it just all on Keir?
Good question. Rachel Reeves is very unpopular as well. Both of them, I find it remarkable that I speak to people and they say, I'm never voting for Labour again because of Starmer. I'm voting for reform. And then I say, what about Andy Burnham? And they say, okay, if he came back, I'd vote for Labour. So I find it really strange that people are potentially at this sort of crossroads between a soft left progressive mayor of Greater Manchester who believes in a green industrial revolution and the hard right politics of Nigel Farage. And I think that's where so much of it comes back to the cult of personality as well. And Keir Starmer's inability to connect with people, connect with voters. I had a guy saying, this isn't his fault. A guy yesterday said to me, I can't vote for a Labour leader who's a knight of the realm. And that's where politics has got to in some ways. That's not in any way Keir Starmer's fault, but it's another thing that's counting against him as a kind of figure of the establishment that doesn't believe or doesn't kind of connect with working class voters.
Let me ask you, Kitty, about the man not yet called Sir Ed Miliband. Are you really saying that Ed Miliband, who lost the previous Labour election, he's been on a journey, right? He's been on a journey from his very awkward sandwich to having some very, very, very clear views about, the environment. And, when you hear him in interviews, he seems to have, improved with age and experience, I have to say. But do you really seriously think that he might be in a position to replace Keir Starmer?
No, I don't. I think this is an expression of the Labour left casting around, trying to find an alternative to Wes Streeting. This is the current expression of. With they would rather have Angela Rayner, but she's currently on the bench for reasons we know all too well. And therefore, if they're saying if we can't have Angela, then who do we want instead? And in the absence of someone else presenting themselves, I don't know, Louise Haigh or Lucy Powell or one of these figures, who is there that we could have who is an alternative to Wes Streeting in May? And Ed Miliband's name keeps coming up. And as you say, he's ruled himself out.
I tell you what I find astonishing about this discussion. We're only 3 minutes in or so. Is that we you, and I'm not even saying we, but you seem to have all written off Keir Starmer. And I'm not advocating. I'm not a member of the Starmer family. I'm not Morgan McSweeney in disguise. I'm just wondering. So this is my question. Let me start with you, Paul. Is there any way that Keir Starmer can save his political skin?
I think that if you talk to Labour MPs, pretty much all of them, off the record and talking to you quietly, are like, well, he's done for. It's the machinations of how we move on now.
Have you met any backbenchers who think that he'll survive?
Well, there's a few loyalists, and maybe they're not backbenchers, maybe they are paid up members of the government who are still.
I'm talking about foot soldiers here, not people who get paid for their jobs.
Even a lot of during the election, they were all called the Stormtroopers, like the young. Predominantly young men who all look very similar to Keir Starmer. The TV is not that dissimilar from him. And even a lot of them now pretty annoyed about how the weekends panned out for him. So you speak to Labour MPs and you're left with the impression of, crikey, Keir has not got long left in him. However, I think the thing that always comes back in my mind is Labour aren't quite as good at decapitating the party as
the procedure's not there. It's not as easy.
Yeah, and as the Tories were. Everyone always talk. For years we've had him on the show a million times. David Miliband, and everyone always talks about David Miliband. Oh God, the leader that could have been. Well, he bottled it twice in 2008. He didn't go for it, and so in the back of my mind, I keep on thinking, you talk to all these MPs, you think Keir Starmer hasn't got long for it. However, you need someone to wield the knife.
Kitty, I guess timing is really bad for Keir Starmer, isn't it? Because the May elections are in May. We are now at the end of January. He's only got a couple of months for people to feel any improvement or for growth to actually manifest itself, etc., etc. But I'm also looking at the polls, and I noticed that there's been a slight uptick in Labour's favour, a slight downtick, if you like, for Reform or for the Greens. And we're going to talk about peak populism if that's what we've reached later on in the podcast. But I just wonder whether maybe we're seeing the beginnings of some kind of partial recovery. And if they pitch it right ahead of the May elections, could they game their failure and turn it into a success in the way that Corbyn did, in the 2017 general election, which he lost, but for him it was a kind of great personal victory? Kitty.
There's quite a lot in that question.
Sorry, yeah, it was a long one. I keep them shorter from now on. I get paid by the word per question. That's why it's a new thing.
That's a great gig. I think several things going on. One is, yes, the polls are moving around a little bit at the moment. And strategists both in Labour and the Tories that I've spoken to think that the Reform lead is very, very soft, and that actually we've reached the high watermark of where Reform are going to get to, and the only way is downhill from here. I mean, of course, the only poll that really matters is in May, is where it's the first proper data point we've got of what people are really thinking about Reform. But equally, May is a chance for people to give the government a kicking. That is why the kind of Gorton and Denton thing is so interesting, is that it would have provided another data point. But also, Andy Burnham polls above the Labour national average, and therefore probably is the only person who could have held on to that seat for them. And I've forgotten the rest of your questions, Matt. But
I think why don't we just say that was a brilliant answer, Kitty. I've forgotten the rest of my questions too. So let me move on to Liam. Liam, do you think that Andy Burnham could have saved Labour in the May elections had he been elected leader? I mean, MP first and then leader.
Yeah, you were jumping ahead of yourself there, Matt, but I think we all know that's where it was going. I've written a column on this. My sort of colours are nailed to the mast. I do believe from my experience of speaking to people and the general kind of consensus I've gathered, that if Andy Burnham, as Kitty said, if he had stood in Gorton and Denton, I think he's probably the only candidate who could win that for Labour. You look at the individual polling of Labour with or without Burnham up against Reform in that by-election, and it's about 4 or 5 percentage points different either way. So I feel sorry for whoever Labour selected as their candidate. I think they're in a really difficult position, because I think if you were in Gorton and Denton, you were hoping to vote for the very successful mayor of the city region that you live in, who I think across the board has to be regarded as the most successful city region mayor that we've probably seen in the devolved world, devolved country that we live in. And then you've suddenly seen that his party have blocked him from standing. I think that people who were even on the fence about Labour would go the other way, and that people who are already going the other way will be even more entrenched in their vote for Reform. So I think that Burnham could definitely have won that for Labour, and that would have been a massive boost for Starmer as well. I think this only hastens his descent, really.
Right, Paul. Do you think? But if he had been elected, had he been elected in Gorton and Denton, do you think he could have turned things around nationally? Had he then been elected leader of the party?
I don't know. I think Liam will have a better steer on this than me. But I think the jury is still out on Andy Burnham. Like, he's benefited massively by being the king of the North. Not just because he gets to be the king of the North and bowl about Manchester and looking great.
Could he be the king of everywhere?
Well, and when you're the king of the North, you're not facing questions about everywhere else.
Yeah.
You're not daily, or at least weekly, put on a platform where you have to answer for yourself. We have to answer difficult questions. He's not out doing morning rounds and being made to look a mug on the Today programme or on Channel 4 News or anywhere. So he's benefited by not having that national presence, really.
Kitty, have we projected things onto Andy Burnham, or some people, not us necessarily, but have people projected stuff onto Andy Burnham that Andy Burnham doesn't have? Is he like a sort of Christmas wish list of political talent that we will never see whether it actually, holds up under fire? Yes,
I think so. And also this weekend's done nothing to dissipate that impression, has it? He's now a martyr in the eyes of the Labour left, and will continue to be so until he gets his chance to shine. The other thing is, Andy Burnham's been on quite a political journey. I looked up some of his contributions to a Treasury Select Committee the other day, because I have nothing better to do. And he sounded almost George Osborne like in his sort of appreciation for sound fiscal prudence, to quote Gordon Brown, and it's extraordinary that now he's talking about not being in hock to the bond market. I mean, the idea that this guy could come in and basically borrow however much he wants to build more council houses and the bond markets wouldn't react is just nonsense. So in fact, the bond markets were even reacting to the idea that he might get Gorton and Denton. So and this is before we've even got onto the idea that he's going to stand up next to Donald Trump and be the savior of the left and sort of have a Love Actually moment or whatever people are trying to project onto him. I think it's just nonsense.
Would he have picked up Donald Trump's papers from the trade deal that Trump dropped to the ground? That's a key question. Keir Starmer picked them up, like the good supplicant that he is. And would Andy Burnham have done that? I don't know. Liam, let me ask you just a quick one. I'm just fascinated by this. So Andy Burnham has been mulling this idea of standing in this, in the by-election that's coming up. He must have known that there was a very good chance that Keir Starmer and his people would block him. So why did he do it anyway? Is it because he wants martyrdom status, or because he thought there was a chance that they wouldn't block him? What's going on in his mind?
I mean, you're right. You would assess that he's done his homework and realised the makeup of that NEC was absolutely not in his favour, including the Prime Minister himself, of course, who I was a little bit surprised to see cast a vote in what many would see as a slightly petty move. But I think that it's both things. I think that he did think that there was possibly a chance that he would appeal to Keir Starmer's vulnerabilities, and that Starmer would look and say, look, I'm going to look incredibly weak if I block Andy Burnham from coming in. I'm going to look like I'm scared of people within my own party, and I will write the opposition's attacks for themselves for the next few months, which I think is what has happened. And I think Burnham thought, I'll take my chances on that. And the net result, if they block me, I get to go back to my successful job as Greater Manchester Mayor. Okay, a few people might have their noses put out of joint, but I think most people in Greater Manchester will welcome him back. And he gets to look like a martyr. And I think only probably, hastens the demise of Keir Starmer. So I think
clever
Burnham
move.
But Burnham had it win-win. Starmer had it lose-lose, and Starmer really lost.
Liam, I got a question for you. So a hefty chunk of Keir's argument was, look, it would cause a mayoral by-election that cost £4.5 million of taxpayer money. That is almost offensive for us taxpayers to dip into their pocket. What do the people of Greater Manchester think, though? Do they think, thanks, Keir, for saving us £4.5 million? Or they think, no, this is just poppycock?
I mean, it's a fair point, but I think everyone sees through it. Nobody believes that's the reason why they stopped it. Nobody thinks that if it was in their advantage that they wouldn't happily fold in that £5 million.
There's no thanks Keir posters going up all over the place. No,
no.
Cheers for that £5 million.
I've seen loads, by the way.
This is how we're going to spend it. I just don't think anyone buys it. That's the problem. And also, I think you could make the argument that they can fold it in with local elections. They can work it around, and ultimately, people won't know where that £5 million's gone. So I don't think that really washes. I think what they do see in Greater Manchester is the threat of reform, and I think that they will have thought that Reform are going to now win this by-election, and Andy Burnham was the only person who could beat them. I've got family who live in Greater Manchester. They're very, very fond of him as a mayor. They think he's done great things on transport. But it's not like he's just started. He's into his third term. So I don't think he could be accused of abandoning Greater Manchester. He's done 8-9 years, and he would be leaving them in a very decent position. So I don't think that argument works either. I think Starmer and co knew that he was a massive threat.
Kitty, I just want to get back to this point because I don't think any of you really answered the question. Is there any result in May, other than victory, which is highly unlikely, that saves Keir Starmer's skin?
There is a world in which Keir Starmer serves out the year as Prime Minister because it's so difficult to get rid of a sitting Labour leader. You need 80 Labour MPs to gather behind a challenger, and then even if there is a challenge, Keir Starmer could win any election. And that there is a world in which the Labour left doesn't get its act together, doesn't come up with a viable candidate to Wes Streeting, and therefore Keir beats Wes in a leadership contest. I mean, I think that's quite unlikely if it ever got to that point, because I think even those in the party who support Keir and who are, even vaguely grateful that he won them their seats, think that, take one look at his poll ratings and think, actually, this guy is not going to lead us into the next general election, and we need to change frontman. And if that's Wes, then okay, maybe we'll grit our teeth and even if we don't like his politics particularly, although Wes has tacked to the left a little bit in recent months, even if we don't like his politics, we will grit our teeth and get on with it, because we think that Wes perhaps is the better chance of seeing off reform, of seeing off the Greens and the Lib Dems.
Liam, what about you? I think Nigel Farage, Mr. Farage, once said that he fears Angela Rayner more than any other candidate. I'm not sure whether he was just playing with us, but she's got the populist touch. She's a great communicator. Who is most likely, in your book, and I know it's early days and things are always moving, but after the Burnham thing, who's most likely to be the heir to Keir, and who's most likely to beat Nigel Farage?
Well, I agree with Kitty that when you take Burnham out of the equation, it's a bit of a mess. And I was speaking to MPs in Merseyside after the Burnham situation, and they said that it could well be Angela versus Wes. But of course, Angela has this very recent baggage, and however, whatever you think of it, whether you think it was a little bit unfair that she lost the job over it, it's just red meat to the right wing newspapers who will just go after her relentlessly. I think it's it's maybe a little bit unfeasible that someone who resigned as a deputy prime minister over a situation like that so recently is then going to stand for leader. I do think that without that, she would be the obvious candidate. Right. Against Wes Streeting, who is obviously certainly we know about his leadership ambitions. I personally don't think that Streeting is the man to beat reform. I think he's way too connected to the current administration. I think he won't be seen as the thing that Andy Burnham's got on his side. I know I keep going back to him, is that he's not seen as this. I know it's interesting because he certainly very much was part of this kind of government elite. This, he was cabinet secretary and things like that. But since he's moved out of Westminster to this Greater Manchester area, he's seen as kind of outside the bubble, looking in, talking about the things that are wrong with the country in the way that he can. Now, he wouldn't be able to do that, of course, back in Parliament, but from the outside, he can. So I think it's, Angela and Wes. I can't really think of anyone else. I was surprised to hear Ed Miliband fancying another tilt at it. It's a bit of a retro throwback, but I can't see that myself.
Liam, Kitty, I've got a question for both of you actually on this one, because you make a really good point there about Wes, being from the same wing of the party, and he's going to be seen as too linked to Keir to win over people. But then when it comes to reform, there's a completely different argument, because you look at the big faces now that are popping up all over reform, and it's former members of Boris Johnson's government. And you've got two arguments here which are sort of going head to head, where you're like, well, if the biggest challenge is reform, and yet the biggest faces in reform are people from Boris Johnson's government, so people either have it in their head that no, they're too linked, so I can't vote for them, or actually the general public just isn't as quite politically savvy and don't really see the inner machinations that all of us see. So I don't know, I'm interested from pair of you how you think
that was a really long question, by the way.
Sorry, but there was only one point. I just said it really badly.
Longer than mine. I timed it. It was like 2.5 minutes. Okay, if you can hear a question now, do please answer, Liam.
I've got one response I would say to that, which is that I agree. I think that the influx of Tories from the sort of, particularly the chaotic final years of their administrations, is becoming a mistake and a problem for reform. I think it's very hard for you to continue to market yourselves as the kind of insurgents coming from the outside the establishment, even though we all know that's nonsense anyway, but it is something they've successfully branded themselves as. If you have, you are chock full of cabinet ministers who were part of the Tory administrations that left the country in such a poor state. I think I'm finding it is sort of continual, the Spider-Man meme where everyone's looking at each other. It's like, well, hold on. I keep seeing Robert Jenrick talk about how the Tories broke Britain, and Suella Braverman talking about how these other parties failed. And it's like, I don't know how stupid you think people are. Like, we all know that you were prominent members of these governments. I don't know whether that translates across the board to the general public. So far, Reform have managed to hold that off. But I think the more people that they add from those various failed administrations, the bigger problem it's going to be for them.
So have we reached peak populism, Kitty?
Hard to say. I mean, I think May will just be everyone kicking everyone, and everyone kicking the government, everyone kicking the Tories, and that will be the high point. And then I think Liam's right. People will start to take a closer look at reform in the run-up to the next general election. And I mean, reform is still trying to get Tories over, not so much councillors or, lower-ranking ex-MPs, but I think they still want to get as many sitting Tories as they possibly can, just to bolster their numbers in Parliament. But Liam's right. Like the more of them you get, the more you look like a retirement home for failed Tories, and the more you can't present yourself as the kind of outsiders. But we've got quite a long time until the next election. I mean, I don't want to sound like a Labour Party spokesperson, but things might improve. In fact, what Labour's sort of pinning their hopes on is that, I think in the run-up to May, is that in April the leaseholders reform bill gets enacted, and therefore renters' rights will improve, and they can start pointing to that. If the economy starts improving, I mean, that's very slow. If inflation keeps coming down,
people have to feel it though, don't they? I mean, there was one thing talking about growth numbers. You've got to actually feel it. Just want to ask you about something else, and start with you, Paul. We haven't talked about Trump yet. I mean, Trump is such an extraordinary presence on the global stage that he kind of washes up on your domestic doorstep as well. Does Farage have a Trump problem? Has Keir dealt with Trump well enough to be rewarded for it by the voters? What do you think?
I think the government certainly thinks that they've handled Trump very well. Like, I don't want to make a big deal of it, but a pretty big deal. I was in Davos last week.
You were
mixing it with the billionaires. Really? Yeah, I'm a big deal.
But we don't remember your speech? Did you give a speech?
I did. Gave many speeches.
He was after Mark Carney.
They were big and beautiful.
Because they remember Mark Carney's speech, but not. Anyway, listen.
All right, bloody hell, Matt. Jesus.
Okay, no. Anyway, I'm just jealous that you were there. It's FOMO.
But look, the Labour Party think they handled Trump over last week really well. And like speaking to Rachel Reeves' team.
But is he being rewarded for it, do you think, by the voters, in the opinion polls?
It doesn't appear so at the moment. And I think it is a common thing that prime ministers really, Keir is over in China at the moment. He does really well on a foreign stage, looking like a world leader.
Does he get appreciated for that at home?
No, and no prime minister does on a grand scale. Boris Johnson loved being in Ukraine.
Yeah,
David Cameron, he was all about Libya. But does that really ring true with the electorate, especially when you're in the middle of a cost of living crisis? No,
Tony
not
Blair
really.
was killed by too much presence. The fatal attraction to George Bush, too much presence on the global stage. Liam, do you think Trump helps Starmer and hurts Farage because of Trump and Farage's friendship?
Yeah, I mean, well, Farage is definitely finding it more and more awkward. He's having to give fairly kind of mediocre admonishments to Trump over things like Greenland, which he clearly finds difficult. I think that, we know that Trump doesn't poll well in the UK, so I think Labour should keep pushing that one. I agree with Paul. I think that Starmer's greatest successes in his time in office have been on the world stage. But I also agree with you, Matt. I just don't think it translates. Again, to go back out to, where I was in St Helens the other week, a council that's been run by Labour largely since 1974, that I fully expect Labour to lose in May, and for Reform to be at least the largest party. No one was talking about Donald Trump. Everyone was talking about the cost of living, about the state of the town centre, about the fact that they can't afford food in the shops. It's all anyone's talking about. And the stuff with Trump is seen, I think, as a bit of a distraction on the side, even though, as you say, it has an effect on all of that. But I don't think that Starmer's presence on the world stage is translating to the domestic agenda.
Kitty, the one moment I thought that Reform might actually be in trouble because of Trump's friendship with Farage was when he made that comment about British troops, not really getting involved and staying away from the front line in Afghanistan. I mean, then you're really, really, touching a neuralgic nerve, in the kind of at the heart of the Reform movement, or indeed, the old Labour movement. I mean, dissing British troops after 457 of them have been killed in Afghanistan and thousands more had life-changing injuries was a really bad idea. And I could just see Nigel Farage squirm when that was being said. And there will be many, many more moments about that, coming from Trump in the future, I'm sure. So, Kitty, again, is that a problem that Farage faces, or is the populist headwind so strong that it doesn't really matter?
Well, Nigel Farage has done a fairly good job of distancing himself from Trump, I think, in the last few months and weeks. And and actually I was fascinated by what the kind of chain of events that led up to Trump sort of semi backing down. He got up on the I think it was the Monday morning and said, "Oh, I didn't really mean it," and that was after the King and the Prime Minister had basically, the King had sent a note over the weekend expressing his displeasure, and Sir Keir Starmer spoke to him on the Sunday, and I think that showed the kind of, you wonder which had the most impact. I wonder whether it was the King's note that had more of an impact perhaps than Starmer kind of lecturing Trump on the phone. But I mean, aren't we talking about a life post-Trump though? Because by the time the general election comes round, we're going to be looking at who's next, aren't we? We're going to be looking at, is it JD Vance? Is it Marco Rubio? Who is the person in the White House?
Or a Democrat. Do you remember the Democrats?
Yeah, I was about to say.
There's
no,
a
I was about
party
to
called
say,
the
assuming
Democrats.
that
Biden,
Yes,
Obama, Clinton.
Well, this is Channel 4. This is Channel 4, absolutely. Of course, there might be a new West Wing.
Don't start profiling us, Kitty, like that. We are slavishly neutral. Let me finish on a very quick question to all of you. Again, if push comes to shove, is the fact that the Reform is absorbing all these Tories, even if they're has-beens, does it make them more clubbable, to people in the middle who still find the idea of voting for Reform a little bit, out, off Broadway, that they'll vote for them because of all these former Tories there? And therefore, in a contest between Reform and Labour, does Reform win it? Quickly, first you, Liam, then Kitty, then Paul. It's early days, I know.
I think the more Tories that enter, particularly from who were a Tory government that was so roundly beaten for its failures over 14 years, becomes a bigger problem for Reform. I think Zia Youssef has actually said they're going to stop. They're going to have a deadline for when they stop inviting them all in. So they're getting their applications in.
You can no longer sell us any second-hand clothes after this day. We will not accept your pre-loved items in this shop. Okay. What about you, Kitty?
I mean, and I just think that will become a bigger problem for them the more they come in, yeah.
All right. Kitty, what do you think? Is Reform unacceptable still for so many people that they, even if they don't like the Labour Party, they can't quite bring themselves to see Nigel Farage in number 10?
I think actually it's the economics that's the problem, is that they're so all over the place, and they're slightly hazy economic plans. It's like you never quite know which way they're going to jump. Are they I for ages thought that Nigel Farage was a Thatcherite, and then you look at some of his state control of coal industry, and you think, hang on a second, this isn't very Thatcherite, and welfare payments as well, and which is an odd place to land, I thought, for Reform. So I think we need to drill down more into what they actually think. But I think actually people are projecting onto Reform at the moment in the same way that perhaps they're projecting onto Andy Burnham. These are outsiders, and they will come in and they will do what I think I want them to do, rather than necessarily what they're saying.
So, Paul, maybe Keir Starmer is the pot plant of British politics, sort of maligned, ignored, not watered enough, written off, and suddenly he's still there.
Have you just got a call or a text from Morgan McSweeney? Is that what's going on here?
I'm sure that Morgan would use slightly more flattering language about his boss, but you're writing him off too, right?
Hey,
Starmer versus Farage, who becomes Prime Minister.
I'm not writing.
I know it's a parliamenary system.
I'm not writing him off at all.
Come off that fence, Paul.
Many of his own MPs have already written him off. I think ultimately what it comes down to, back to what Kitty was saying earlier on, the mechanism is far from simple. And what we know from history, the Labour backbenchers and the people who would be challenging are not happy or not overly keen on wielding the knife. And those two things may be the thing that makes Keir Starmer stay in post for as long as possible.
I've just had a brilliant idea to end the podcast on. I want from each of you a single word that sums up the last year and a half of Labour government. One word, Paul. One word.
Disappointing.
Disappointing. Kitty?
Frenetically disappointing.
2 words, okay. Liam?
If it's got a dash in the middle, I think it's one word. U-turn.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's it. Very encouraging stuff from all of you. None of you are going to be on Morgan McSweeney's Christmas card list next year, I fear. Anyway, who knows? Liam Thorp, Kitty Donaldson, Paul McNamara, thank you very much to all of you. That was the Forecast. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.